morning, Oliver Dean, who's a political commentator, and Grace Badamosi, political commentator. Good morning to the two of you.
Good morning, David.
Nice to see you both. Right, let's talk about all of the big headlines. Let's start. Keir Starmer has ordered an economic reset. For the last 6 days, I've been talking about tariffs. We're sort of watching what Donald Trump is doing. He's hit the ground running, make America wealthy again, and then you've seen China responding with 34% on their tariffs, which is in reciprocation to the United States. Now, Keir Starmer, this is according to The Observer, is preparing to rethink key elements of government economic policy. He says old assumptions should be discarded. He says we may need to raise taxes again or cut benefits again. We know that almost $5 trillion was wiped off the value of global stock markets as a result of that. We've heard Jaguar Land Rover have now actually said they're pausing shipments to the United States. What do you think, Grace, Keir Starmer actually means? Is everything up for grabs now?
I think it's shocking, but again, somehow unsurprising for particularly this Labour government. I think with what you've mentioned with the tariffs, with sort of China responding with these tariffs, Rachel Reeves's previous, I guess, mini budget or fiscal statement, whatever they want to call it, left very little headroom in the beginning. So now they're going to have to...
She fiddled it, didn't she?
Basically. So now they're going to have to look to cut even more, which is obviously going to impact sort of the worst off in society. So, yeah, I think especially when they went into government sort of saying that they're not going to be cutting spending on welfare, they're not going to be increasing taxes. I think at the next budget, we are going to definitely be seeing tax increases.
So it's interesting, I think, Oliver, just in terms of Starmer's rhetoric, and of course they're pre-briefing us here, they're saying globalisation has failed, right, but they're also saying, I will shelter British business.
Yeah.
Now, I don't really know what that means.
Well, look, I think it's worrying with what Keir Starmer's saying, the fact that they could be considering raising taxes, despite having pledged in the run-up to the election that they weren't going to raise taxes on working people. But I think, look, Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves have a choice here. They can do what, for example, China did and other countries are going to do and impose retaliatory tariffs on the United States. But I think that would be a grave mistake. We don't want to get into a trade war with the United States. The only people that lose out in a trade war are consumers, are everyday people. And if Keir Starmer goes forward with either tariffs or tax increases, it's going to be the worse off and they're going to suffer as a result.
And how do you think he's dealing with it so far by saying, look, we need to be calm and pragmatic, let's not jump to anything? That bit I welcome. I'm not quite sure why he's now talking to businesses and saying come up with a list of goods that you might want to put tariffs on, or is that part of a broader strategy?
I mean, look, in terms of the calmness and the pragmatism we're seeing from him, I think he's right to do that. I mean, considering that, you know, other countries have faced worse tariffs than we have, that's a good sign. But obviously a 10% tariff in itself is completely terrible for the economy. But like you say, I think, you know, the fact that we're even considering imposing tariffs on US goods is, like I said, a grave mistake.
What does he mean by this, Grace? So Keir Starmer will say tomorrow, this is tomorrow, that the seismic global economic effects prove the government must move further and faster to boost growth with supply-side reforms. Apparently, this week they're going to make pro-growth announcements. Well, that'll be a first, including easing regulations on electric car manufacturers and bringing forward parts of the government's industrial strategy. What industrial strategy?
I mean, I welcome sort of investments into sectors I think can really prop up British business, but I am hesitant to giving more power to the state, particularly this government. If I'm being frank with you, I think we do need to get more investment in society to sort of, with what Ollie mentioned with the tariffs, we need to start looking at propping up British economy, but at the same time with supply side reforms, that's just more spending, which means that's just more taxes. So I don't know. I think it's a little bit of a tricky one.
But you see, so unless I'm totally misguided, I actually think this is a great opportunity for us because, of course, the EU very unhappy about the whole thing. Ursula von der Leyen's hair getting bigger and bigger as she sort of fights this back. So we've been hit by 10%. I agree, that's not ideal. But they've been hit by 20%. Now, surely, and in many ways, he could now say, right, the economic situation around the world, the global instability has changed so dramatically. We're going to abandon our fiscal rules. This is actually a brilliant way of blaming an external factor to completely rewrite your economic economic philosophy and policy, you could then say, right, we're going to empower small businesses, we're going to drop the employer national insurance contribution levy that we said we put up, we are going to tax businesses less so that we get inward investment into this country.
Yeah, and it's the fact as well that Keir Starmer has come out and said that these are supposedly ironclad fiscal rules, and yet we're now seeing he's willing to completely go against them. But I think you're completely right to say that this is a perfect opportunity for the government to turn to businesses and say, look, we have confidence in you, we are going to, invest in you, put faith in you. And for example, things like reversing the national insurance contributions rises. If we can put businesses at the centre of our society, at the centre of the economy will grow and people will be better off.
Yeah. Are they going to do it?
That's the question. I'm cautious to say yes, because knowing this government, it's just going to be more tax increases after more tax increases. But if they are really serious about getting the economy growing, about putting growth at the centre of this economy, then they need to go with it.
I just don't know what else he can do personally, because if you then just if you don't do something radical, you are in serious trouble.
Yeah, I think that's the main thing, is that Keir Starmer, as you mentioned, has up to this point been playing sort of the pragmatic and sensible approach, which I think is the correct approach up until a certain point. At some point, sort of with what Ollie mentioned, you have to think outside of the box a little bit. You have to look at the constraints that you've been given and, like you mentioned, build a growth strategy out of that, look to invest out of that. So I think I want to see a little bit more of creative thinking from Keir Starmer and sort of find a way to actually sort of turbocharge the British economy that's been stagnant for a number of years.
OK, there's a brilliant article in The Spectator. You may not have seen this. Clement Attlee, in the words of Winston Churchill, was a modest man with much to be modest about, which is a fantastic put down. But just... basically, this article is about whether you have a sense of purpose. Part of the problem for the Labour government is actually, I'm not sure there is a unified sense of purpose, a set of principles, an ideology. I think they came from being in opposition into power, and actually there is nothing cohesive holding the whole thing together, because you can see all the different departments working in different directions. You've got Rachel Reeves over here, then you've got Ed Miliband spaffing money on ridiculous projects and all the rest of it. Then you've got expansion of airports, which flies in the face of what Ed Miliband is doing. Does the Labour government actually have a strategy?
I don't think so, and considering as well that they ran on the promise of change. Yes, they've changed things, but nobody knows what that change is. Rachel Reeves has pledged that she's going to fix the foundations of the economy, but like I said, I don't think they know what these foundations are supposed to look like. And it just seems as though they're running from fire to fire, putting each one out rather than tackling the source of the problem in the first place.
It's interesting, they talk about the different governments. Margaret Thatcher had a purpose. John Major didn't seem to have a purpose. And governments are therefore defined by whether you have a sense of purpose. It's all very well having individual policies, but you really need to have an end goal to get there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think particularly this government is very much without strategy. I think a lot of people talk about how fractured the sort of previous Conservative governments were in terms of ideology. And while that may be true, I think this Labour government, when you actually look under the hood, you realise it's really not a cohesive force at all. There are many sort of factions of ideology and sort of purpose and strategy within this Labour government, which results in what we see at the moment, where it's sort of everyone's running, but in what direction, I guess.
And also, just for a Labour government, I thought the idea of Labour was to look after, well, it's called Labour, it's meant to be the party of work and looking after the poorest in society. But when you look at this, the measures they've announced will drive 250,000 more Britons, it's 250,000 Britons, 50,000 of them children, into poverty. Their policies also mean that 3 million families lose an average of 1,720. And here's the thing that they haven't quite worked out. Poorer, disabled households are taking the biggest hit.
Yeah, I mean, look, they are the party of work, but that's what they've been saying. But it's also the party of working people. And
what is a working person?
Well,
I've heard
no, I completely agree. And I don't think Keir Starmer knows that either. I mean, the policies that they've put forward are hurting the most vulnerable in society, the poorest in society. But I think, to go back to the point you said about how Margaret Thatcher and John Major had end goals and objectives, everybody knew when Thatcher came to power, the end goal was to shrink the size of the state, to reduce taxes and to reduce the bills that you're going to be paying. Keir Starmer's come to power and nobody knows what the end goal is. Like, is it going to be a high tax, high welfare economy? Is it going to be, low taxes, high spending? We don't know. It's simply the case that we don't know.
But he doesn't know.
Exactly, and nobody knows, and it's worrying that we've got we've somehow elected a person who's now Prime Minister and a Chancellor who have absolutely no clue where they're going to end up in 4 years' time.
And so, with those characters, you've got Rachel Reeves, you've got Ed Miliband, you've got Keir Starmer. The polls are going against them. So who wins out here? Who leaves the Big Brother house?
Honestly, I've got no clue who wins, but I can tell you who loses, which is the British people.
Okay, good answer. Yeah. Who's leaving the Big Brother house?
Who's leaving? I think Rachel Reeves is going to be hearing. I have full confidence in the Chancellor in about a few weeks. I think at some point
you're going to say that, or is he going to say that?
I think with sort of the fiscal headroom that we've been talking about, particularly with these tariffs, that's going to be absolutely wiped out. And at some point, with what Ollie mentioned, because they have no direction, they haven't sat down and said, we know that spending is going to increase, we know we're going to increase welfare and taxes are going to have to go up as a result. They haven't said that. They haven't said the flip side, which is that at all costs, we're making sure the books are balanced. So at the end of it, I think Rachel Reeves is going to sort of end up taking the fall for this one. So
do you?
I think so.
What do you think?
I agree, and I think it's right that she does take the fall for it, because the economy has stagnated as a result of her. We saw in January, for example, payroll employment went down. We've seen employers cutting jobs because of her tax hikes. It's safe to say that the economy is doing worse off as a result of her, and I think she's the only person that can take the fall for this.
10,000 millionaires leaving the country.
Yeah, it's ridiculous, and it seems as though this is supposedly the most pro-business government in UK history, and we're seeing businesses lose confidence in them every single day.
And what's the timeline on that?
In terms of
her leaving, which is your prediction?
Gosh. Well, I agree with Grace in that we're going to be hearing over the next few weeks that the Prime Minister has complete confidence in her. Look, I don't have...
That's the death sentence, isn't it?
I wouldn't have confidence in her to watch my pet if I went on holiday, let alone run the economy.
Right.
But look, it's going to be at least a few months, I think, until the Keir Starmer really sees that she's dead weight and he needs to get rid of her.
Yeah?
Yeah, I think so. I think because of the previous Conservative government, the Labour Party won't want to look like they're sort of chopping and replacing people ad hoc, so they're going to sort of keep her longer than she's sort of useful
I mean, they're
guess.
certainly not as ruthless as the Tories. The Tories are much more ruthless. If you don't perform, you're out, and they love to change a leader, as we know. Thanks very much to the two of you for the moment, Oliver Dean and Grace Badamosi. So, David, let me just get this right, says Stuart. Keir Starmer is having another reset after the previous reset, the earlier reset. Yeah. That's it. Exactly right. We'll continue with our Future Politics panel after this break.
Harry and Meghan have never actually worked in their lives. But fancy picking on a black female, which Harry has just done, given, as you've laid out, all of what's gone before us, accusing the royal family of racism, but of course very cleverly not saying who, so that the thing would fester and fester. So it has come back to bite them. But where we shouldn't be surprised is, don't forget, Harry, this is the individual that years ago was photographed wearing a Nazi uniform.
Because they're trying to convince the people who are having their very profitable and decent, well-paid jobs in places like Aberdeen cut because of the net zero agenda.
It's in Aberdeen.
Yes, that's right. They're telling them now that this will be fine because they'll invent a kind of we'll invent a Mickey Mouse GBN job for you, which will obviously pay the same and be as productive as the one that we're giving up, even as we import.
Across across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back. I'm in the middle of Future Politics panel with Oliver Dean and Grace Badamosi. I just want to finish this conversation about political direction because I think it's really important. There are a couple of stories around. Jamie Green, the former Conservative Scottish MSP, has defected to the Liberal Democrats, which seems an extraordinary thing to do. He was the West of Scotland MSP. He was unveiled as a Lib Dem at the party's spring conference in Inverness on Thursday. Now, Jamie is a friend of mine and he is a true Conservative through and through. He went in on the back of Ruth Davidson and obviously the Tories, it was the resurgence of the Tory party in Scotland. He has quit because he says that actually the Conservatives lack direction and they are becoming reform light. So they are moving to the right. He says that's not the party that he actually recognises. And that brings me rather nicely just to talk about sense of direction and everything, Grace, which is, we'd said Labour doesn't have a sense of direction, but I just don't see what the Conservatives stand for. And then you've got Kemi Badenoch, who really on paper has everything, and she's just doesn't deliver.
I think firstly with the story about Jamie, I think that is a little bit of a shame. But I do sort of share his concerns that the Conservative Party is perhaps sort of in the hopes of chasing electoral success, moving closer to reform and sort of moving closer to the right, which I don't think is firstly in their best interest.
But is that
nor
because
is that
they
an
don't
election winning
have
strategy?
Is it because the Conservative Party it's the tail wagging the dog, isn't it? You don't go after the votes and then make up policy on the back of getting more votes.
Yeah.
You actually have a vision and then the voters follow you.
Yeah, exactly. And I think sort of voters, if they are sort of in support of reform, they can sort of see through that. And Conservative voters who are perhaps not interested in what reform has to offer are also equally turned off by that. So I think going back to your question about the future of the Conservative Party and Kemi Badenoch, the point of sort of this period of opposition was to sort of build back the Conservative Party and bring back Conservative ideals. But I think there is still a little bit of a mix within the party where some people think we should be going further right and some people think that we should be sort of going back towards the centre.
See, I've been watching Robert Jenrick's videos and actually I think he's quite impressive.
Yeah, well, it's quite interesting though because so a few weeks ago the CPS hosted the Margaret Thatcher conference.
Yes. And
Kemi gave a keynote address there. But I think the most interesting speech there was actually George Osborne because he made a good point that the Conservatives in trying to gain more votes are going to try and look to move further to the right and to get reform votes. But in doing that, they're actually losing the centre-right ground, who are, which are like people...
Like Jamie Green.
Exactly, like Jamie Green. People in the southwest are actually going to the Liberal Democrats. And the Conservative Party has always been a broad church. It's always been a party that has...
Well, it's not one party, is it?
Well,
it's
exactly.
about 7 parties.
Well, yes, but it's, you know, you've got One Nations, you've got Thatcherites, you've got everybody in the middle. And I think you're completely right to say that I don't think we have a sense of direction at the moment. We just seem to be chasing electoral votes. What we need to be doing is getting sound policies in place, and then the votes will come as a result of that.
And also, I think, you know, the Conservative Party keeps saying, well, Kemi's not giving any policies at the moment because she wants to think about it and have a strategy because obviously 5 years is a long time. That doesn't rub in this day and age of 24-hour news cycles. They want... The public need to know what... You don't have to give me the detail, but you do have to tell me roughly the direction you're heading.
Yeah, and she did, a few weeks ago, lay out her plans for renewal 2030 or whatever it was. But they were...
Another ridiculous soundbite.
Yeah. I mean, look, it's broad policies, yes, but I think she's correct in laying out broad policies rather than going with anything specific. There's a worry from an electoral standpoint that if she commits to anything serious in terms of like actual serious policies, specific policies now, the economic situation could change 2 years,
True,
3
but
years down the line.
she's now sort of saying, well, I might leave the ECHR. Well, if you go to reform, you know the reforms policy is to leave the ECHR. So that's what I mean, but that people don't really know where they stand.
Well, but we don't know where we don't know where the country's going to stand in a few years' time. I mean, look, had Kemi announced a set of economic policies a few weeks ago, she would have then had to U-turn given Trump's imposition of 10% tariffs. So, you know, if the situation is going to change within a few weeks, why make specific policy recommendations and decisions now when they can change infinitely for the next few years.
Isn't that what upsets people so much? Which is actually they don't know what politicians stand for, and they just think they're all on the gravy train. And quite frankly, if you're not going to say anything, you might as well be led by a fridge freezer.
I think with Kemi, I do agree that she's sort of committed to quite broad policies at the moment. But I think, like Ollie mentioned, that is a little bit of a good thing.
Come on, give me a policy. Tell me one policy.
That is a little bit of a good thing.
Tell me one policy, Grace.
In terms of what we discussed about the Labour Party and the Labour government, I think that is what we're going to see is the Labour government nailed to the cross by their own policies. I think ultimately they are going to have to go in direct contradiction to what they said they were going to do when they were in opposition, and that is a thing that voters don't like, sort of voting in people because they say they're going to do something and doing the exact opposite. So I think Kemi, for all of her faults, is sort of doing the right thing at the moment.
How long's she got?
I think she's got longer than Reeves, if that's a...
Okay.
Yeah.
That's the barometer.
That's the barometer I'm going for.
How long's she got?
I would have confidence in her to lead the party into the next general election.
Rubbish.
It's true.
She's not going to make it.
Well, it would be ridiculous for the Conservative Party to get rid of a leader before they've even...
well, you've had a few, haven't you? You can have another one.
No, I just don't think... Look, if you're trying to go to the public and you're trying to say we're a changed party, the last thing you want to be doing is doing what you've been doing for the last time you were in government and getting rid of leaders like they're completely nothing.
Okay, all right. Let's move on and talk about this big story in the Mirror, actually. Shock figures reveal the true scale of kids' deadly weapon crimes across the country. 10 knife or offensive weapon crimes by children have been recorded every single day, according to the Mirror. Offences have soared by a quarter in a decade. As many as 3,591 knife and offensive weapon crimes by 10 to 17-year-olds were dealt with by the criminal justice system in the year ending 2024, September 2024. That means there are 69 cautions or convictions in England and Wales a week. That is 10 a day. And obviously I do have to mention Adolescence, which is this thing on Netflix, which I'm not going to tell you what happens in case you haven't seen it. But there is a major problem here. What is going on? Why kids feel the need to carry knives?
Yeah, I mean, look, we've seen since 2010 there's been a 25% increase in the number of young people being involved in this. And I think at the same time as well, we've seen the number of police officers across our streets reduced by about 14%. So I think there's definitely a correlation there. But if young people aren't being properly shown the consequences of their actions, if they think that they can walk around with knives and with other sharp weapons and not face the consequences for it, then they're going to keep doing it and we're going to see crime increasing.
Yeah, I think firstly those numbers are absolutely disgraceful. I'm really shocked by that. And I think also another factor we have to consider is the sort of degradation of social cohesion. So us as a community not feeling like we're together, and then particularly children are the ones that suffer as a result. So if you're not particularly coming from a strong family unit, or if you're not sort of supported by adults who act as role models, teachers or whatever, then you're sort of, I guess, left behind. So you're given to these sort of external forces, whether you join a gang or you sort of fall in with the wrong crowd. And I think it's very sad that young people who have this potential are essentially sort of left no other alternative than to go down a road that is sort of harmful to themselves and harmful to others.
And we've seen these terrible examples, haven't we, of innocent kids being killed or seriously injured, just going about their own business or being in the wrong place at the wrong time, or just happening to look at someone in the wrong thing. So I mean, they are shocking, absolutely shocking figures. What do we do? What do we do about it? I mean, I agree part of this is parental, but then the parents may not know what's going on, but then the parents need to know what's going on. So it is partly parental. Also, the role of the school. What else do we need to do?
I think sort of those are the two main ones that I think about a bit, sort of school, because you, as a child, you spend quite a lot of time there, and if you're not at school, you're at home. But I think a little bit of a further point would just be sort of around internet access, I think, and sort of the things that you see on the internet, because with adolescence that you mentioned, you can have sort of parents that have no clue about the spaces and the chat rooms that their children are in, and they're sort of radicalised to this point of absolute insanity.
Well, so this is a really interesting point about the internet and what these kids are watching, because the blurring between what you're watching on a video game, for example, some of those are incredibly violent. I think actually for a developing mind, it is very difficult to disentangle what is real and what is not real.
And the algorithms are designed in a way that keeps these kids watching these things, keeps them addicted. And I think it goes to a broader point that we need to really be shaping how young men specifically and young boys are actually viewing this content online, and they need role models. I mean, look, we saw Gareth Southgate give a speech a few weeks ago where he said, look, young boys need role models now more than ever, because they need proper, strong, masculine figures in their life that aren't people like Andrew Tate, but are people that show, the real role that people can play in society.
I would agree totally. Just very quickly, if I may, we talked about young people not actually being in work, and I just wonder, there was an article in The Spectator as well saying the national living wage rising from £11.44 an hour to £12.21, that's a rise of 6.7%. A pay rise, that's of £1,400 a year. We've been talking about the fact that businesses are already struggling because of the cost of national insurance contributions, that we know all these businesses are laying people off. Are we paying too much? Is the minimum wage too high?
Oh, it's a very bold question.
Well, thanks.
No, but I'm hesitant because I don't know the complete economic situation.
Sure.
But I would say that it goes to a broader point about the economy and the fact that businesses are facing increasingly difficult circumstances. We need to be getting more people into work, especially young people as well. And we've supposedly got a government that is the party of work, and we need to see proper economic policies that champion that.
Yeah, I think I agree with Ollie. It's a difficult one.
It is a difficult one.
I think the wages in this country are too low. I think sort of in one of the most developed countries in the world, I think people should be earning more.
We have the second highest minimum wage. The second highest minimum wage relative to median wages in the G7. We're slightly behind France, but ahead of Germany, Canada, Japan, and the US.
I think if Britain wants to position itself as sort of a
you
global
want more?
leader, I think people should be paid more. But I agree that it's sort of pointless when that's eaten up by increases in council tax and train fares and broadband and the rest of it. And on the business side as well, again, it's sort of pointless if businesses have to let people go to cover to the high wages. So I think people should be paid more, but I think that shouldn't be at the expense of a healthy economy.
No, but does the government actually understand this, that the businesses are struggling, and if you can't actually afford to employ people, you won't employ people?
Well, I would hope that the government has the sense to sort of listen to what businesses are saying, but I think that might be asking a bit too much of this government at the moment.
No, I don't think the government understands business at all. And look, we've seen groups that are representing businesses. So, for example, a charity called the Jobs Foundation has come out recently and has, really acted as a driver in support for business. But the more time Rachel Reeves spends in Number 11, the more I think, she really doesn't have a clue as to what she wants to do.
So you're cutting her odds now, since your last answer. So she's got even less time.
No, I said she has a few months, and that was me being completely optimistic. And that's, I think, what Grace said earlier about how, they need to distance themselves from the previous Conservative government in, getting rid of ministers willy-nilly. But look, I don't have confidence in her as a Chancellor. Businesses don't have confidence in her as a Chancellor. I think the Prime Minister doesn't have confidence, but he's saying that he does, and it's only a matter of time before she has to kick the bucket. No, not in that way, not in that way.
I wasn't expecting that. Oliver and Grace will pause there whilst I just compose myself. We'll continue with our Future Politics panel after this break.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back, 8:41, Sunday, April the 6th. I'm joined with Oliver Dean and Grace Badamosi. We're in the middle of our Future Politics panel. Now, this is quite interesting in the Telegraph. Hotels are threatening to evict hundreds of asylum seekers because they are failing to receive contracted payments from an accommodation company, which has been ditched by the Home Office. These are hotels in the London area saying, well, look, we haven't been paid for the asylum seekers, so we're going to throw them out. And that sort of made us then talk earlier on about the fact that we've got all these hotels full of asylum seekers in the middle middle of areas like central Ipswich, for example, or Boston, or wherever else, which many people are finding them that these make the town centres less welcoming, that it's an impact for local businesses and so on. And we were just talking, and I wonder what your thoughts are, and I won't come to you first, Grace, because I think I know what you think. But Oliver, what many of our callers are saying, look, why are they in hotels? Why don't we put them in former military bases with a great big perimeter fence? If you actually, fine, make sure they're looked after and you're fed, but you have a canteen, you know, you're given 3 meals a day. You don't give them luxury accommodation in a 4-star hotel. You remove the incentive to come here. That will soon get back, and people won't then make that crossing.
Well, look, we've previously put them in military base or military camps.
Scampton, Wethersfield.
Yeah, and we saw the conditions on show, and quite frankly, they were horrific.
But make the conditions better then.
Well, yeah, but it depends how we're going to do that. And look, I think there's this,
in what sense were they horrific?
I will just say, like, you know, I think there's this systemic problem that we seem to be criminalising asylum seekers for trying to, you know, make a better life or try to, or when they're fleeing conflict.
They're illegal migrants. Many of them are illegal migrants.
Because what we need is solutions, not scapegoats. And it feels as though many people, you know, whether it be politicians, whether it be people in the media, are seeking to criminalise these people. They are human beings at the end of the day, and we need to make sure they're living.
How many are genuine asylum seekers?
Well, we don't know the answer to that, but again, what
the majority?
Look, at the end of the day, they're still...
Is it the majority?
They're human beings.
Is it the majority?
They're human beings at the end of the day.
There are also human beings that made the choice, these young men made a choice to come across to this country.
Yeah.
And we are basically re-incentivising more people to come here. And we're spending $5.38 billion on asylum seeker accommodation when we can't actually afford for the rest of the country to operate properly.
I mean, look, there seems to be this common assumption that these people who are being housed in these hotels are living in absolute luxury.
Well, they're not bad.
No, well, I've been to one. There's one in South Croydon,
right?
And it's not at all what the media portrays it to be. And I think we need to turn away from this, you know, black and white issue of saying, look, these people are bad, these people are good, and we need to be focusing on long-term solutions for this.
Come on then, that sounds like a politician's answer.
No, like, again, it's just the case of we can't just say to people...
You're giving me waffle. What are you going to do then? You're in charge, you're going to keep them in hotels. How are you sorting this out?
No, what I'm going to say is that the solution is not to turn around and put them in...
The
solution is not to turn around and put them in situations where their conditions are bad. Look, you brought up
You've got a bed, you've got a shower, you've got food.
You brought up the Bibby Stockholm.
Yes.
Yeah, the Bibby Stockholm, and they had diseases running rampant on there. And that's not a condition that anybody should be.
What about a former army base where actually they've been used and they've got accommodation, they had family accommodation on those military bases? There are many near me in Suffolk, for example, that are disused, but they are also secure.
If the conditions are safe and they are humane and people can live in them, then it's okay.
Fine.
But
now it's okay.
But we can't, as we said earlier, look, we've had situations in the past where we put them into camps and then the conditions have been absolutely atrocious.
I still don't know what your solution is, Grace.
Thank you, Ollie. You sort of took the words out of my mouth there, I think. Suggesting to sort of de facto imprison people who are fleeing war and conflict is not a good look for any developed
Not
country.
all of them are.
But that's the point. We don't know. These can include people who are fleeing genuine war and conflict, and the point is that you mentioned that they're illegal sort of immigrants. They're not. Being an asylum seeker is not an illegal act. You can come to a country to seek asylum. The point that it becomes illegal is when your asylum claim has been denied and you are due to be deported and you abscond. That's the point it becomes illegal. Someone coming to this country...
Is hotels the right solution?
I agree with you. Hotels are ridiculous. The reason they're in hotels is because the government doesn't process their claims properly. True asylum seekers, they want to come to this country, they want to be quickly processed so they can start building their life and rebuild into having faced the most horrific conditions. I agree with you that the use of hotels is ridiculous.
If we had former military bases like Scampton, like Wethersfield, would fewer people make that perilous journey?
Firstly, I think people who are fleeing absolute sort of war and terror, fleeing absolute war and terror, I think they're going to come sort of no matter what the accommodation is. I think, again, I go back to the point is we don't need these massive amounts of accommodation if the government does their job and processes people's claims
But
quickly.
They're not going to.
We're sort of creating solutions for problems that we created ourselves. So I think the solution that you're sort of passing Ollie for is to actually sort of process people's claims.
So there are another 8,000 migrants in hotels since Keir Starmer came to power. They've realised they are not on top of this, they can't get on top of it, and yet more will come.
I agree with you that this is an unsustainable situation. I completely agree with you on that point. My point of contention is how we deal with it. I don't think putting people in army bases or in, as Ollie mentioned, truly quite horrific living conditions is the way that a compassionate government should be treating these people.
All right, I'm just going to talk. You're not Gen Z, are you? I am. Are you Gen Z?
Yes, I am.
Oh, you're Gen Z. Yeah. Right. Now, wait for this. So, I might say that you lot are really lazy, Gen Z. That's what, common thought process. Apparently, though, grumbling about the work ethic of the younger generation is a time-honoured tradition. That's very true, actually. As you get older, you say, well, they don't do any work. One Oxford professor is pushing back. Apparently, the teenagers and 20-somethings of Gen Z, you're not lazy, apparently. You're practising justified effort management.
Do you know what? I'm inclined to agree with that, actually. I am inclined to agree with that. I think, particularly in places like the workplace, Gen Z are sort of not tired of being taken advantage for, but if your sort of workday is 9 to 5, why are you staying past 5:30? I think people realise that, work isn't everything.
Because you're lazy.
It's not laziness. I think it's not laziness. I think it's just Gen Z sort of having effective boundary management and making people aware of the fact that they're not going to be taken advantage of. I actually think that's a pretty good point.
It's fascinating, though, isn't it? Justified effort management.
I mean, look, we both go to LSE. I can safely say that, we're not. I'd like to think that, we're not lazy in the slightest. And I mean, look, having to get up at 6 o'clock to come on your show this morning.
Well done.
So I think
6 o'clock is very late.
But I think that goes to show that, we're not all the same. Not all of Gen Z. I think there are definitely some, and we've seen as well with this rise in sick note culture and stuff, there is definitely a case to be made. But to paint everybody with the same.
I'm being slightly cheeky, but there is something quite interesting. So back in my day, you had to kind of chain yourself to the desk to prove that you were worth it, so that you would get in before the boss, you would stay there until it was midnight or whatever, and that was the culture that prevailed. You're right, actually. What people are doing, I think, is they're deciding, I'm going to have better work-life balance, and actually there's an argument to say that if you do that, your performance goes up anyway. And maybe we are just seeing a shift in the way that people work.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, people, if you're going to be going into the office at 9 o'clock and leaving at 5, and then taking into account that you're then commuting back and forth from the office, if you're going to be working longer hours, like you say, you're going to be less productive. You're going to actually be a drain on the company more than a benefit. Whereas if you maintain that work-life balance and if you prioritise your own well-being, then you're going to end up doing better.
I mean, you should try medicine or possibly working in the media where you have absolutely no work-life balance. I thank you very much to both of you for taking part. Thank you to Oliver Dean and Grace Badamosi. That was today.